with AI. Hollywood studios proposed using AI to scan and own extras' likenesses forever. So basically, this is saying that these Hollywood companies are trying to scan people's faces, all of the extras, so they never have to get any extras again. They can just reuse your face and your image indefinitely and keep on putting them into different movies. So,
how do you come in a room with a straight face? Hey guys, I got some great news. Got some great news for the actors. Technology once again has blessed us. We're gonna scan your likeness, pay you once, and never pay you again. Bye.
hi, I'm Seiji.
Hi, I'm Bard.
Together we are the Seiji Bards.
All right, guys, today's our third episode of our podcast. Okay. We hope you would like, share, and subscribe. We're looking to grow our channel. And let's get into it. So today we're going to be talking about, we have a quick few topics. Our first segment, we're going to talk about different forms of slavery. But the key is, for this show, we want to talk about student loans a little bit and what's happening with the student loans and how they basically sort of, reinstituted this payments for student loans, and then we're going to get into slavery. But first, Seiji wants to kind of give us a background.
Yeah, I want to preface our conversation today, because when we're talking about slavery, as Bard said, we're talking about financial slavery or debt slavery as it pertains to student loans. But in no way diminishes what's traditionally viewed as slavery, which is chattel, bonded, forced labor. And when we look at this historically, slavery has existed in almost every society since the beginning of time. This doesn't mean that it was ever acceptable, but that is a fact. And it's unfortunately a fact that is oftentimes lost in modern education, especially in the United States right now.
So let me say something about this real quick. So I've heard people talk about, student loans being slavery. And I think what they're getting at is the fact that maybe the terms are so long and they've borrowed so much money. But I would probably argue that the entire system of having school loans tied to inflation, and so as inflation goes up, so does the cost of education. It's tied to the cost of education. And I heard someone talking about that, how those are linked, and I think that's one of the problems with, so the educational system, the way it's tied to school loans, is causing a little bit of problems when it comes to this. Now people are starting to talk about slavery when it comes to that.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, because when you look at inflation for the person who's already borrowed money is a good thing, because in real terms, you're paying less as time goes on, as inflation continues to erode your purchasing power.
I see what you're saying.
But inflation being tied to student loans, or to the cost of education, that's a different type of topic. But what we want to look at over here, though, is different forms of slavery. So then, I think in order to do that, Bard and I are trying to do is establish a connection between financial slavery and the term slavery. So to begin with, slavery has existed in many forms. So when we look at chattel, forced slavery in the United States with African slaves, that isn't the only form of slavery that was observed or written about.
Right, and that's also for historical purposes. I have a good friend who's Mexican, and she said for some reason they're not including the Native Americans who were also, she said there was over 100 million of them that were also forced into slavery. But unfortunately for Africans and certain groups of Africans, especially the people from the central east of Nigeria, they were the Igbo people. They tended to be some of the most resilient slaves, and they became very hot commodities, if you want to use that term. So that
right.
increased the market value for those type of slaves. So you're going to get, if you're going to enslave people, think about this, you're going to get the best that you can get. And if you have other people who are weaker, who are dying off, then they're not going to be as good. So anyway, so that being
Bard,
the
you're
case,
completely right. What happened, it doesn't make sense to import slaves from another continent when you have a ready supply of slaves in the New World. The problem in the New World was that most of the natives, and we're talking about death rates in excess of 90%, died.
Was that due to slave conditions, or was that because of disease?
They died because of disease.
Okay.
And then on top of that, you had more of them die from overwork. But
right.
mostly it was from smallpox and other old world diseases that were spread by Spanish, English, and Portuguese.
Okay, so basically we're setting up the conversation for slavery. We're using this. We're basically using this to set it up. So, so we've got a nice platform and background, just kind of talking about this. So let's. So what about bonded? What's this? What about the bonded? Is that more of your?
A bonded slave would be someone like the first American settlers who came over. They would be called indentured servants.
So like some of the Irish, maybe?
Yes.
Okay,
Even before the Irish didn't really come until the 1800s, but we're talking about like Scots and other Englishmen, where you are basically bonded to someone for a certain period of time. It was 3 years at first with or 7 years, then it went down to 3 years because people were not living long enough.
Okay.
So what happened with indentured servitude, you had mostly total control over these people for a period of 3 or 7 years, or whatever the term was that was agreed upon, in exchange for passage to the New World.
Okay, so there's that going on. All right, so now we've discussed forced slavery. We're just kind of taking a look at our notes here. So forced slavery, we've discussed about with the chattel.
Yep.
And then, of course, right now I heard we have sexual slavery. I'll mention this really quickly.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton, I guess when she was, I don't even, to be honest, I'm not even sure if is she still in the Senate right now, or is she out of there?
No, she's out.
She's out there. Okay, so when she was in the Senate, she did mention, in front of the cameras, she did mention how the number one type of slavery right now in the world is, the number one slaves are Eastern European, white women from Eastern Europe who were being deceived or coerced into sexual slavery. So that's another form of slavery.
Correct. Actually, what different researchers have said is that there are more people that are slaves today than there were in, say, 1850.
And that's really disheartening. So anyway, not to, belabor the point of slavery, we're just giving you a backdrop. Now, we're going to move into some other aspects, or actually a few
Correct.
other aspects of it.
What we're going to do next is we're going to move into how the evolution of views on slavery in the United States has changed. Because prior to the Civil War, there was about a 30 or 40 year lead up where Northerners and Southerners were arguing about slavery and how it was wrong and the condition of the slaves.
Okay.
So one of the things that was argued at length is by Northerners. Northerners argued that slavery was wrong.
Right.
Southerners countered their argument by saying, well, if you look at the factories that you've set up in Lowell, Massachusetts, and all of these other places, you basically are forcing these people to live as slaves. At least our people get to go outside, have fresh air. You have people living in row houses in pretty much the same conditions.
So they were basically, everyone was kind of into it in some sort of slavery or into some sort of abuse at some point, and they were just arguing for which abuse was the lesser of the two evils. Pretty
exactly.
much. Okay. So let's go on from there. So what else?
So what we do have in the United States is one of the only places I want to point out. It is the only place where you had a country that literally tore itself apart to end slavery. And those reasons for ending slavery were not always the most altruistic, we're all equal.
Right.
It was more of
It definitely wasn't that.
Yeah, it was a financial and labor type of argument where
Right.
if you couldn't compete with the slaves' wages, so let's get rid of slavery so it'll improve our wages.
Right. So economics, basically.
Correct.
All right. So let's move on. So today's slavery. What are we? People are claiming. I've heard someone say this. I know someone who did a doctoral degree in psychotherapy or counseling, something like that. So she mentioned how this is the new slavery. That's what she said. So what do you think about that?
When she said this is the new slavery, was she
Talking
talking
about school loans.
School loans.
Yeah.
Well, see, I think that I don't think that school loans are necessary, and so I disagree in part. But I think that what happens is, when we pan back a little further, we see that whether you're looking into student loans or consumer debt, credit card debt, the fact is that in the modern world, Western Europe and increasingly other places around the world, which are following the lead of the United States, is that people voluntarily sell themselves into slavery. So basically, our neighbors, ourselves, we voluntarily jump up on the slave blocks and we sell ourselves. I mean, think about that picture for a second.
All right, let me push back against that. I think what's happening is we're being channeled into a system that doesn't necessarily have our best interest at heart. The thing is I think people we're sold this idea on one side that we need an education to, of course, college graduates make X amount more money, this and that, and we need an education. And then on the flip side, once we get into these systems of higher learning, then we've got to rack up these huge amounts of debt. And then people so they're doing it for a better living, knowing that they'll have to kind of deal with it. And I look at it as kind of like a mortgage on a house, right? You have a mortgage on a house, you get to live in the house. As long as you're living in the house, the mortgage, you're paying for living, right? Until you pay off the house. With school loans, you are paying for it's like you've paid for your education to be able to work at a certain rate, salary rate, and as long as you're working, your education is paying for your ability to work. But I think one of the problems is that inflation is outpacing, and then there haven't been raises. I think that's one of the key issues we talked about. Salaries haven't been increasing with inflation. So what's happening is as inflation runs away, cost of living becomes ridiculous, and that exchange, I'm paying to work in order to live, and I'm paying for my mortgage in order to live. It's not making sense to people because it's becoming uncomfortable. They're not having the money, and that's where they're saying it's slavery. Because, let me just make this final point. I know with indentured servitude, when they would bring people, let's say people from Asia, India more specifically, the British duped them into these contracts where, oh yeah, let me go over here and see what's happening, make some money, go back home. This is the next iteration of slavery. And then they would get there, they would work, and then they realized they weren't saving anything. And then they were stuck over in Guyana or wherever they were. And and people are comparing that to what's happening now with school loans.
Well, just to go back to what you were saying, when you look at a mortgage, realize that a mortgage, practically speaking, means, do you have any idea?
I know mort means death in French.
So it means death pledge. It's like when you go to a morgue or a mortuary. The root word is death, okay? So for those of you who are wondering about it, when you're signing a death pledge, you're probably not going to outlive your mortgage.
Right.
I mean, at least traditionally speaking.
I know. The thing is, we call it mortgage, but the truth is we do know people who've paid off their houses.
Correct.
And there are ways to pay off your house. Like I'll throw this in for extra, velocity banking. My brother has been talking about velocity banking.
It's where you're own your bank.
Yeah, you're using debt to pay off debt, and you're paying off a house in 4 or 5 years. One of my cousins did it just recently. He paid off his entire house, him and his wife. So anyway, there's ways around the system, and we're going to get into some of these ways. That's one of the goals of the podcast. We're going to talk about the business of, and this will be like maybe the business of life, or the business of debt, or the business of using debt. We can talk about that. So anyway, in terms of slavery, so let's move on. We've set the base. We're about 15 minutes in. We're timing our sections. We're going to make it more efficient for you guys. So student loans, or you want to touch on some of this?
Well, we can talk a little bit about, for example, when we look at slavery or financial debt as slavery, there are a couple of questions that pop up. In the last century, the 1920s, we call it in U.S. history the age of consumerism, or rise of consumerism.
Right.
It's the first time about 100 years ago people finally had the ability to purchase not only what they needed, but what they wanted. They started getting multiple different colors and options. Before that, your mom would patch your clothes and you'd go to school with patches, and that was just the way it was.
Okay. So
But
consumerism. Okay.
What we've discovered over the last 100 years, living in an era of plenty, and Peter Zahan also talks about this.
Who's Peter Zahan?
Zahan is
for me, because I don't know.
He's
who he
an
is.
economist,
Okay.
right? Who basically talks about how after World War II, we've lived in an era of plenty, where you had increasing labor supply because birth rates were increasing, factories, and all of this came in at a perfect time where you had trade networks that were controlled and safe. With the end of World War II, where the U.S. controlled the oceans, goods could transfer back and forth for very low costs. You didn't have to worry about pirates. But today we see that system beginning to break down because the U.S. doesn't want to police the oceans, number one. Number two, you have a lot of countries, Italy, Japan, a lot of places in Western Europe, Germany, Russia. All of these places have populations that are collapsing. China's population is collapsing. So what happens when you take out that labor?
We'll get into that too later on, why these popular. Anyway, go ahead.
So what you're doing is basically you're removing labor from the market. So who's going to produce the goods?
So the equation. Okay, so this is a good part. This is a good time to segue into this just a tiny bit. We'll give you a little taste. We are going to be talking about AI today. And AI is also threatening our existence, as per some special, people high up in the tech game. Elon Musk, for one. AI is threatening the labor market. So the people who are here may not have work, and universal basic income is being floated as a very relevant solution, guys. It wasn't just what's that presidential candidate, Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang. It wasn't just him that was floating it. It's more and more people that are starting to talk about universal basic income. And actually, one of these, I think his name is Noah. I don't know his last name. He's an Israeli. He's tied in with the World Economic Forum. I'll call it a matrix for now. He's tied in with that. I don't necessarily know his role per se. I think he may be an advisor, but I think he's a PhD in something. I have to look it up. But he's also talking about, he's referring to our human populace in certain terms that may make people feel uncomfortable. But in terms of labor, what he's been saying is that people, he's referring to people as being useless in terms of the labor market. The question is, what are people going to do? So now that we just mentioned collapsing human, the human populations in terms of our labor markets, human resources. Now we have another problem: the sudden advance of artificial intelligence, and this being connected to machines and taking away jobs. And we're going to get into this because there's a lot to talk about. This is actually really kind of scary stuff. So now we're talking about. We're moving from slavery to not having anything to do. This is what NOAA, this World Economic Forum advisor, was discussing. But anyway, that was a quick segue.
They want us to move into an era where we're just consumers. We consume media. We just, and we can be marketed. And that's where, for those of you who haven't seen it, I think Bart and I both encourage you to watch Black Mirror Season 6, Episode 1.
With Salma Hayek. You want to see that because there was an article that just came out. I don't have the article pulled up at the moment. Can you?
But we can get into that in a little bit here.
Yeah, I'm gonna look for my phone. But
so when we're looking at student loan debt, and this is something that the Supreme Court has been dealing with, as well as President Biden, where just I think on Wednesday he announced that there was going to be about $39 billion of student loans that were being reduced. Okay. But when we look at student loan debt in the United States, it actually stands at $1.78 trillion. $1.78 trillion, which works out to about $38,000 or $37,000 for the 45.5 million people who have any type of student loan debt. That stands at 45.3 million people in the United States currently have student loan debt.
It's a good portion of the population.
It's about 1/6 of the population, 1/6 to 1/7 of the population.
And having debt, this economy, capitalism, it works. We need debt. Debt is considered good in a capitalist economy. As long as they're paying their debt to fuel the system, I think that's what really matters. But I think the problem becomes when people start asking for student loan forgiveness and just completely wiped out, because then it's just going to add to our national deficit, and then that's where they're going to put it. And then it's going to cause more inflation. And then what happens with the next set of students who need education, who are going to take out loans? It's an unending cycle. It's an unending, and it has to end because it's going to implode.
Well, the thing is, if society is going to fund your education, it should be for something that's relevant. And that's why, the extreme examples of underwater basket weaving or the transgender studies. And
underwater basket weaving is pretty useful, though.
or the transgender studies, women's studies, a whole bunch of different things that people really, there's no market for. If you had a doctorate in bricklaying, it's right. Just, okay, that might be interesting for you, but maybe medieval bricklaying isn't something that a company is going to hire you for.
So what you're saying is basically, maybe we should, and this would actually help out the economy and sort of direct students and not not have them waste money. But if you're going to go into, I think guidance counselors should have a calculator. Okay, first thing on the calculator, maybe this is something we create, and happy to give you guys this idea. We're going to be talking about business, and one of the things I like to do is problem solve. So I told you guys that in the first episode. Maybe there's a calculator. First thing on the calculator is where do you live, and there's a cost of living per that place, and that's factored in. Mm-hmm. Next thing is what career are you going into? Okay, you put that career, and then in the system, in the database, it's linked to a monetary value of how much you can make. So that's factored in as well. And then we could have other values, and that calculator can tell you whether or not you'll be able to afford living in said city. And then you could change, okay, well, maybe I want to live in Seattle. Okay, how much does it cost in Seattle? Okay, we're definitely not going to be able to afford to live here. And then the guidance counselor could use this as a tool to sit down with the students and say, you know what? This degree isn't for you, and this money, we're not going to give you a student loan for this. This won't work.
I would actually, I agree from that very end point where student loans should not be granted to everyone. But I think that it's the student who has to come to that determination. Society doesn't need to think for you. If you've gotten to 18 years, 17 years, or college, and you can't figure out that your degree is not going to have a market value, that should be on you.
Now check this out. Now it's good for us to kind of push back, and I'm going to push back on this because I think it's healthy to have a little bit of debate on this topic. I don't think a 17-year-old who's going to college, first of all, they're not an adult legally. Then again, I don't think even 18, I don't think they're able to make great decisions. And let's be real. There are some adults, 30s and 40s, who don't make great decisions. And I think the very fact that we have careers where we have life coaches who help people, we have different people in different roles who help people at any stage in life, I think people always need help. One of the top categories on YouTube is self-help. One of the top categories of books, top 5 for books that are sold, are self-help books. People are always looking for some sort of guidance. So I think my argument to bring it around, I think kids in high school, they need to sit down with a guidance counselor, someone who's smarter than them. We talk to our parents as we're growing up. We get information from our parents. We get information from our peers. And it helps guide us and make decisions. We're supposed to get information from the news and specialists on the news, advisors on the news, and we make our decisions, whether it's on stocks, whether it's on this or that. So I think there's always a market for getting information and help. What do you say to that?
I totally agree that there's always a market for it. But if you've reached 17 or 18 and you can't make any basic decisions, and society has failed you, education has failed you, and I might counter that there might not be that much hope for you in obtaining that college education. If you're saying, well, I'm going to go into something that has absolutely no value,
right?
You need to take responsibility for some of your decisions.
I think there is a level of, I think what happens is, when you click on a website, you guys, in the comments, let us know what you think about this debate, first off. We want to engage you guys, and give us your thoughts. I think it's a great discussion. I think Seiji's right. There is a level of responsibility. The guidance counselor can't do everything, but I think the guidance counselor is there to help give you all the information. Maybe there's an information gap. Even the government has information gaps, and there's specialists that help them make decisions in terms of the economy. Maybe there's an information gap this 17-year-old doesn't have. Guidance counselors are there to say, okay, here's the information you can look at. Here's the projected growth. And to be fair, with law schools, remember there was a big settlement. Law schools were putting out fake information, and a lot of people who were going to law school weren't getting jobs later on, and they were forced into, some of them, not everyone's an entrepreneur, and they can't, running a law office is an entrepreneurial feat. A lot of people couldn't do that, so they were suing to get their money back, and guess what? The government said, you know what, you're right. We agree. And they found out that a lot of these law schools, a lot of these universities, who were supposed to be sort of, in a way, arbiters of information and truth, were giving fake data to support their business model.
Oh, absolutely.
To support their institutions. And these people were taking out massive loans in order to go to school to better themselves, better the country, and it backfired on them. So, that's another situation that we have to look at is, can we trust the information? So if adults are watching Fox News and CNN, and we can't even trust those institutions per se, because they are propagandic outlets as well. We're learning that through Project Veritas. Even Fox News isn't safe from Pfizer and their money and corporate interests. How can a 17-year-old who's now starting to navigate the world make good decisions if even adults are being scammed?
I think you can't trust any news.
No,
at least,
trust no one.
I think Donald Trump and CNN have taught us that everything is fake news in our world today.
A lot of
everything.
things are.
So when you're looking at labor statistics that are shared by a lot of law schools or any schools in general,
higher learning, yeah,
it's really no different than late night TV infomercials.
Yeah, it really isn't. And the thing is that these are the people who are supposed to be helping you. But you got to remember, universities are businesses. And let me give you a good example of this. It might have been 10 years ago. I think it was after 2008, after the economic crash. What happened was Harvard University enrollment slowed down. I may be wrong on the dates, but you can Google this. Harvard University lowered their standards for admission. Think about that for a second. They lowered their standard for admission in order to up enrollment. Universities are businesses at their very core.
Absolutely.
And they will do things that compromise their values and especially the credibility of an institution. Imagine Harvard lowering their standard to let people in. What does that tell you? Why wasn't it lowered to begin with?
Well, I don't think educational standards should come down because I think that we're already, in a lot of ways, scraping the bottom of the barrel.
Right.
But what is happening, though, is a situation like when you're looking specifically at 2007 to 2012 with the Great Recession, there were some educational standards that were lowered at institutions, and they really didn't need to do that. But what was created by the government and the Federal Reserve banking system was a system that was so bad where property values and jobs were lost at such a fast rate that people had to go back to school to get student loan money just so they could live. That's and see, that's where when we go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, which is forms of slavery. People were forced into student loan debt at way higher rates. Okay,
So it became predatory.
It became predatory. And then what happens is because institutions are businesses, like
Right.
Bard said, they were then able to increase tuition costs because you're going to get that money back from the government.
Right.
And I need that money so I can live.
Right. So, you know, we're going to get into neo-capitalism a little bit, and neo-colonialism. There is no neo-capitalism. There may be. Some are fighting for a new form of capitalism or capitalism to be eliminated in totality. But neo-colonialism, this kind of harkens back to a conversation we had on, or discussion, or a brief discussion on the IMF, World Bank, and some of their activities in terms of nation states and how neo-colonialists, let's have do you mind if we segue into that at this moment? Okay, so colonialism in its infancy was brute force. We're showing up with guns. Some may argue this is the genesis of gunboat diplomacy. I know with Japan, the Dutch had Japan was closed.
Yes.
They were closed to the world. They wanted to be left alone. But colonialists, you know how they are. We're going to force you to do what we want to do. That's what it is. It's all about exerting force. So the Dutch worked their way into Japan. I'm not exactly sure how they did it, but it was more of a friendly thing. And they were there with the Japanese. But America,
They were only allowed into a certain port or certain areas that were given us, and that was all the contact you could have with them.
okay, so the Dutch were there, and America, here comes America. Whether you guys want to accept it or not, America is an imperialist country. And we do operate on the doctrine of the survival of the fittest and the strongest win. And that's what it is. It's just the way of the world, right? If you don't want to be a victim, you have to be the bully. In other words, there is no middle ground. It's either you're on our side or you're a potential victim. And when you're on the side of the bully, the imperialist, they will have their hands in your pockets. And when I mean in your pockets, your central banks, your banking system, trade, you will trade. So with Japan, what the United States wanted essentially was trade. And they wanted access. And they parked the ships out in Tokyo Harbor.
Yep.
And that was the infancy of gunboat diplomacy. When you have a battleship parked out, cannons pointed towards your harbor. So
That's the first in modern.
in modern time,
Yeah.
right. That's more modern, but it's the same.
It's been the same throughout
It's the same.
history.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same thing, but it's a more modern iteration. It's a more modern look at it. Nothing's changed. Boats popping up on your shore, ships popping up on your shore, telling you what to do. That's the essential message. So in terms of colonialism, that's what it was. Neo-colonialism, it became very expensive, human labor costs wise, to manage, that sort of thing.
Let me tell you. So then there's a lot that you can say about neocolonialism in this whole topic. But back in the early 90s, Sears used to run an ad on TV when they were when they were still more of a retail company than they are now. But they said, "Come see the softer side of Sears." And when I think about financial slavery or financial debt, credit card debt, student loan debt, it's basically come see the softer side of slavery. That's what it is. It's still
It's a nice
slavery.
slogan. It's a nice slogan.
It is. And colonialism was basically, come see the softer side of slavery, of colonies, except now in a new form. So what we had is traditional colonialism, which is, I'm going to go into India or Africa, strip whatever natural resources. It was a metropolis-hinterland relationship. The metropolis, being London, would strip resources at will from the hinterland, which could be anywhere in the world.
Right, and in your view, by the way,
Yes.
so you can watch all this happening live.
Yes.
You just stay over there while we take all your gold and all your resources. Matter of fact, we may take some slaves while we're at it.
Correct.
So, neocolonialism, how would you break that down? I have my,
Neocolonialism was basically a smarter form of colonialism. By the time you get into the late 1800s, even by 1880s, after the Treaty of Berlin, colonies were not effective. They were not financially viable because people started protesting, fighting back, sabotaging the whole trade network.
Right.
And this is where you see all of this explode right after World War II, where you had simmering independence movements and populations that said, well, we're done with this. But what happens is neocolonialism is basically the new form of colonialism. It was
Right.
much more economically viable.
Right, it's a better form.
Yes.
It's a more subtle form too because it's had several iterations. Now, I've just deductively looked at this. I haven't had to, I've done some reading and some learning on it, but you can see what's happening. What's happening is neocolonialism. It's all about your banks. It's all about the banks and trade. And it's your IMF, it's your World Bank, it's your WTO, and now post-COVID, it's your WHO. They're going to force you to take whatever they want, whatever they decide. That's whenever people are ordering nation states what to do, that's a form of colonialism. Whenever you don't have self-determination, you're being colonized. So neocolonialism is the banks. Now, in order to avoid the protests, because we have, see, with the genesis of video cameras, with the genesis of the media, the free press, even though that's been corrupted, the free press is no longer what you think it is. Let me give you a quick example, and we'll probably touch on this in another episode. The Chinese know that their news is propaganda. Americans think it's real. Okay? The Chinese know it's state-sponsored. Americans don't understand that corporations, via the state, have their hands in what you see and what you digest in terms of news. This is why everyone's moving online. And now you're seeing a push by Facebook to eliminate news altogether because they don't want you to know what's happening. And this is how neocolonialism works. Neocolonialism, in order to avoid protests, in order to avoid negative press based on the theft of money from nation states and from, and the deception that's happening to people here in this country and all around the world, the voting populace, which is also sort of a scam, and I'll explain that in another episode, they have to hide their intention, so it's hidden through propaganda. So neocolonialism is alive and well. They're telling countries what to do. They're using central banks. Here's a fun fact for you guys. All of the Arab Gulf states that have been invaded, including Libya, none of them that were invaded had central banks prior to the invasion. Post-invasion, let me give you Libya as an example with Gaddafi. A central bank was set up within a week.
Well, that and about $12 billion of gold reserves went missing. Completely went missing.
And not to belabor the point, Gaddafi was labeled a dictator. What dictator gives their people $1,000 a month?
Libya also had the highest GDP in all of Africa. I mean, per capita GDP. The people there were making about 11,000 or more per year. They had the highest standard of living. And again, this is not to say that Gaddafi didn't kill a whole bunch of people.
Do some bad things.
He did.
But it's hardly a dictatorship.
He also helped fund a lot of different positive projects in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and he was unique as an kind of an Arab African leader that he actually viewed himself as African.
Right. So anyway, we're going to move on from that. We've touched on that. So in terms of debt slavery, how do we want to wrap up? Because how do we want to wrap up this conversation and then move into our AI?
Well, with debt slavery, I think that though
student loans, especially.
with debt slavery and student loans, I think that they both fall into this gray area, and that's why it's hard for Americans to categorize and say, hey, that is slavery. Even though I think that people are taking out degrees that they don't need, right? And they're being lied to in that way.
Right.
I do believe that once you've locked yourself into this situation, whether it was for a useful degree or a useless degree,
Right.
you are stuck in a situation where you are no longer your own man. You owe your labor to someone else who will eventually start taking their pound of flesh.
Right.
And in that way, you become a financial slave, that you have to do this. Otherwise, you start losing rights, the right to buy a car at anything less than like 25%, or to buy a house. You then get locked into this situation where you lose hope and you become a virtual serf. So then, if you're looking at it, what situation, or how are Americans today different than, let's say, sharecroppers in Jim Crow South?
Right. It's capitalism has a way. Corporations always have a way of sort of always having the upper hand. It's just, how much of an upper hand do you have? Do we have X amount of rights, or do we not? And I think what we're seeing right now, we're seeing an attempt at a correction. We're seeing people who are feeling, when you start to feel the effects of, I'm working, I'm not saving, and I can't buy a house. When you start to feel it, that's when these terms like slavery come in. But prior to feeling it, no one was calling it slavery.
No.
It was just, oh, I got a bunch of student loans, but hey, I got a house, I got a car, my kids are in school, I'm happy. It was fine. But now that life is being interrupted in certain ways, now it's a problem.
Well, it's because we're at a new point. So when you first had the beginning of the consumerism, people were making enough money that and you didn't have a credit card or a credit system that was in place. So companies hadn't figured out how to financially benefit in the way they do today. So this existed all the way from, say, the late 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, into about the early 1980s, where people were still making more from year to year and they could pay their debts.
Right.
But after that, our desires, our wants, because of marketing, TV. I mean, we went from 3 TV stations, CBS, ABC, and NBC, to hundreds of stations. I mean, there's literally thousands of stations, and now you have your cell phone where you have marketing beamed into your whatever. It's tailored to what you want.
Yeah, right into your phone. Yeah, it's true. It's very, very tailored based on your search results and even some of your what your friends are looking at. Anytime your friend likes on something, it's gonna suggest it to you, and people in similar groups. All right, cool. So let's put a cap on that. I think we've sort of fleshed out some of the key aspects of it, and I think we should move into our next topic.
Well, I want to say again, financial slavery is definitely a form of slavery that has been recognized throughout history. When you look at bonded slavery or forced slavery, because that is ultimately what is happening.
Right. So it's a softer side of slavery,
correct.
as you said, and I think that'd be a great title for this: a softer side of slavery. That may show up, may not. But anyway, I think this is a good. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And hold on, we're gonna get into our next topic, which is gonna be AI and the evolution of AI and how that is, some people are saying, is threatening our existence. All right, guys, time for our next segment. We're gonna be talking about AI and the existential threat, the threat to our existence that AI is posing. Guys, Seiji, one of the things that we're worried about with AI is that AI is doing too much. In the African American community, we have an expression: he's doing too much. Like, it's just too extra. AI is just doing too much, and what's happening is they taught AI how to code. You're a East Indian American, first gen, and Indians make up a large portion of our tech sector. You know, a large sector of our brain power when it comes to this country and how we run tech. Isn't the CEO of Google Indian guy at the moment? So, as an Indian American, I know this wasn't planned, but how do you look at this in terms of an actual, as its threat to the existence of our, you know, the brainiacs, the Tesla driving smart guys who run our tech in the States for a lot, and over in India as well. It's huge. What do you see this as?
Well, I think the way I look at it, it's going to disproportionately benefit a very few people at the very top.
Capitalism once again.
At the detriment of everyone below. I mean, when
Millions.
I watched that season 6 Black Mirror episode of Joan is Awful, and it was pretty
Without
unreal.
any spoilers, we won't spoil it for you guys, but definitely check that out. We want you to have have an understanding of what we're talking about with how AI could, in a dystopian way, affect our living. Go ahead.
Correct. I mean, and it affects your living in the real world.
Right.
And there are a lot of different things that came up. If, for example, does your voice belong to you?
Right. And here's so real quick. I don't have the article in front of me, but there's a part of the writers' strike and the actors' strike happening right now. Guys, I need you to realize how important this is. The very existence of hundreds of thousands of workers in Los Angeles and potentially around the world is on the line. And like Seiji was saying, it's going to benefit a few people. One of the things that I read this week was that these media companies are trying to capture your image using AI and then basically deep fake you in movies, like CGI. They'll pay you once and then that's it. But the thing is when they pay you that once, that means you are out of work. And when they pay you, it's not going to be $10 million, guaranteed. It's probably going to be low ball, and that's going to be it. And then they'll never have to pay you again, and they're going to continue to make money off of your likeness. Going back to slavery, I mean, slavery is premised in capitalism. We're leveraging free labor or labor that benefits us, right? That's lopsided. You get the very short end of the stick. That's how extreme forms of capitalism work. This is one of the most extreme things I've seen, and this is scary because you were just talking about the voice. I personally think the voice is an instrument. When I want to look, that's why when an artist, say like Whitney Houston, rest in peace, when she would perform, people would come from all over the world to listen to her instrument, her voice. Yeah. Because there's no other voice like it in the world. And I think that's a huge point. So I think artists right now, people who use AI are imitating people's voices, including the dead. But the thing is with the dead, their families benefit. They have a trust, they have a foundation. And we have precedence with this when it comes to law. I'm not a lawyer, but precedence sort of determines how judges decide cases.
So just so you understand what Bart is saying, if you sign away licensing to your image, like how you look, your voice, you could have a computer digitally recreate whatever is wanted pretty much forever.
And what you're basically doing is you are eliminating your ability to work and earn money. This is why this is so scary. So when it comes to AI, let's say, look at the notorious B.I.G., for instance. There's an artist by the name of, there's a producer named Timbaland who created a song with B.I.G.'s voice. They trained the AI how to use his voice and how to enunciate in his voice, and they created a song. And it was a really good song. And it sounded like him. But guess what? Here's another instance. We talked about this in episode 2. Here's another instance where the legal system hasn't caught up. And technology is outpacing the legal system. So what do you think should happen here? He died 20-something years ago, but here's an example but this is an example of how the families benefit from their work. Michael Jackson,
Yeah.
Elvis, the Beatles, many of them who've passed on. If you can now use their voice in new projects, you're now excluding the family from rights,
Yeah.
right? So I think a person's voice should be patented. This is my voice, and I think it's like your fingerprint. This is yours. No one can, imagine if people could copy your fingerprint and then use it to do things around the world, like open devices and things like that.
And just so you know, like this has evolved because you remember back about 10 years ago or so, Paul Walker died. And he was in the
Right.
middle of filming a movie, so they needed him to finish filming that movie. So they
Right.
were able to kind of digitally recreate him using his brother.
His brother, yeah.
And then you have other instances where an actor or actress dies in the middle of a project, and then you basically lessen their role in the movie.
Right. You write them
that-
out of the script.
Yeah, but then you still have some images of them that you're able to use to finish up. We're not talking about that. We're talking about entirely new projects
Right.
that are being created by a company
Right.
that has basically owned your virtual rights.
Right, so you're still alive. But guess what? You go audition for the movie. Matter of fact, there may not be auditions.
No.
They won't need you. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to retire you and use robots. That's why I think, in an argument, I think Andrew Yang was actually arguing for this. He said with AI, he thinks people should have, like, he thinks the money is going to be in machines, owning machines. Like if you, let's say for instance, you have a laundromat, you're leveraging washer, dryer, water, electricity. That's what you're leveraging. Owning machines may be the way to go, but not everyone's going to be able to do that. But I think in this case, you really do need to own your voice.
Well, and
you
this
need
is-
to own your voice
and this is where
and your
you have-
likeness. Well, the likeness is already. Sorry to cut you off. The likeness is already there. If you try to use Morgan Freeman's likeness on a T-shirt, he can sue you, and the law has caught up with that. But your voice and your image and your likeness in terms of moving, I don't think it's caught up with that yet. Deepfake.
No, it hasn't. There are so many different directions we can go with AI and licensing rights and being able to create movies. I mean, just think about it. In the future, just like you might be able to just say, hey, I want a movie with Bard about something, and then 20 minutes later, the whole movie is spit out. So,
Yeah, I think what we're facing is an existential threat, and I think it's something you guys really need to pay attention to, because this could be our livelihoods. The World Economic Forum is planning for mass unemployment, and it's going to be because of AI. You need to start looking at your skill set. You need to start looking at where you fit in. You need to start looking at the capabilities of AI. And it may be time to move into different careers. It may
Exactly.
it may be some work that you never thought you would do, maybe blue collar.
and that's why you also need to work now on getting out of financial slavery as much as you can.
As much as you can.
Because you want to be owned, you want to own your work, and you want to be independent as much as possible of the system. So that actually brings us up into our next topic, which is our top 10. That is the top 10 ways to avoid financial slavery.
All right, let's move on to number one. What's number
Okay,
one?
number one, you want to have a safety net.
All right, so have a real safety net. Okay, so what do you mean by safety net?
So
Like,
a
what does
safety
that mean?
net is
Just money in the
basically
bank?
having money in the bank. Usually, financial planners will suggest three months, depending on the times. If we end up hitting a Great Recession type situation,
Which
you
we
might
may be hitting.
yeah, you might want to be closer to 12 months. And honestly, that's really not realistic.
It really isn't.
But it is realistic if you're able to temper needs and wants and
Right.
realize that there is a difference between what you need
and what,
you want.
And society, the way marketing has programmed us, they've programmed us to get our wants right away. That's
Correct.
how they want us to spend money. And I think this is why you can see China they wanted the people to spend money, and because the Chinese they're savers. Asians are savers, guys. I remember when I saw some data on this, the people over in Asia saved more than Americans, even though their economies were much smaller, but cost of living was cheaper also. Anyway, let's move on. Number 2.
Yeah, number 2.
Don't vacation on credit. So that sounds kind of self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Don't go take out a loan.
Don't take out credit card debt to go on a vacation, because you're going to be maybe less stressed in your vacation, but you're going to get back from your vacation in 3 days, a week, maybe 2 weeks if you're lucky. And then you're going to be stressed about paying off that debt.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of makes sense, but there are people who are tempted to do this. And once again, finance institutions don't make money unless they lend money. So they will try to get you to borrow money for a vacation. Don't be surprised if you see on Instagram or Facebook, finance this vacation, this cool vacation to here, and Instagram. Don't be scammed, guys. Don't.
Yeah. I mean, and be smart about it, because I have a friend who basically went on a $20,000 vacation. He only makes about $30,000 a year.
Not good.
So that was a bad financial decision.
All right, number 3.
Don't depend on overdraft protection. So
that's an interesting one. All right, break that down. What is?
So basically, a lot of people are like, okay, well, if I don't have money in the bank, I'll just overdraft and, I'll pay the fees. But it's kind of like when I used to turn my homework in late in high school a lot. I would automatically lose 10%, 20%,
Right.
So then
Overdraft
at a certain point,
sense.
if you're going to pay it, if you're going to do the homework, just do it on time.
Right.
Or don't do it at all,
Don't do it. Don't pay your bills at all, guys. That's the message, all right? Don't pay at all.
But that'll take you down to the off the grid living. But.
Off the grid living, real quick. All right, number 4. Become disciplined with spending. That's hard to do with all the marketing messaging. Buy this, Instagram this, vacation, time for
I want
vacation.
you to think about this. If you're looking at an iPhone 10 versus an iPhone 14, do they really look that different?
No. Are they really that different? No.
Yeah, so the point is, you have to work on identifying needs and wants and knowing that there's a difference.
Once again, all right, needs and wants. All right, number 5.
Okay, number 5. Drive something that is within your means.
Within your means. So I can't finance a Range Rover? What does this mean?
Yeah, exactly. The average car that's being sold in the United States, the average new car sold in the United States is around $48,000 now.
Wow, I did not know that.
And that's the average. So you're doing pretty well if you're getting a $40,000 car. But the fact is, if you look at how much people actually make, the average person can't afford a $40,000 car.
Interesting. Hey, I drive a $20,000 Toyota, so I'm good. And I recommend a hybrid. I went and got a hybrid to make a point, spend less at the gas pump. So if I'm getting 47 miles per gallon in my hybrid, and you're getting 23, I'm paying half for gas that you are.
Yeah.
Those numbers on the pump, I'm paying half. So you might want to consider that.
I used to get 45 miles a gallon. Now I have a vehicle that gets 23 miles a gallon, but that's because I'm a climate activist now.
Right.
Like the ones that fly around in planes and waste a bunch
of... you want to join in on the activism. Yeah. All right, so number 6.
Okay, number 6. Stop cutting it close with your home.
Break that down. What does that mean?
Basically, when you're looking into a mortgage, people oftentimes will take the 30-year mortgage, and now there's some products out there that are a 40-year mortgage. I don't know if you've seen
I
them.
heard it's gone up a little bit.
Yeah.
Anyway, is it 40? Yeah, 40, yeah.
Homes are so unaffordable.
Inflation.
And people buy based on, they have this idea now of, this is my dream home.
The Joneses?
Yeah,
Anyway.
the Joneses, which are everyone, and your dream home. And you look back just a generation ago, 2 generations ago, you might have a family live in their home their entire life. And then the following generation also lives in that home.
Right.
But now, with how people move around and they view homes, they say, well, I need to have my dream home.
We talked about, early in the segment, we talked about like a sort of an interface where a guidance counselor could plug in different values. there needs to be a value for the Joneses. Okay, what's your zip code?
Yeah.
You put that in, and it's like, okay, so, but it's interesting. Here's an interesting fact before we move on to the next one. When they value homes, they look at the houses around. So that's sort of a Joneses mentality.
Oh, yeah.
They're looking at this house and this house. What's this one worth? Okay, cool. This is what your house is worth. So it's
summarizing
sort of, yeah. So your zip code kind of makes sense, and maybe your address.
When we're looking at cars and houses, live and buy below your means.
Below your means. I say cut back. Anyway, let's move on. Number 7, what you can afford.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, look, there is a market for fast fashion. I was listening to a show today. There's a company called, I think it's called Shein, SHEIN. They're basically selling like $5 items, and I think this more refers to women. And it was actually Claudia Jordan. She was talking about it, how she'll wear one because she's in media. She's not going to be wearing like Louis Vuitton and Gucci on the set every day. It's unaffordable. So fast fashion, if you're shopping at Zara or H&M, they allow you to wear things that look a certain way, but they're cheaper, $20, $30.
Let me tell you, Bart, I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., and as an elementary school student there, what shoes you wore was really important. And so I moved from there to Oregon to finish up elementary school. And at the beginning of 8th grade, I stepped on this kid's shoes, and he had brand new shoes.
What were they, Nikes?
They weren't. They were probably like Pro Wing Eagles or something.
Some brand new Pro Wings from Payless?
From Payless, yeah. But, if you did that on the East Coast where I grew up, it would really cause a problem.
It's like a murder.
Yes, it was like a murder.
Especially if they're Nikes.
They were Air Jordans. Like, that's what people
Jordans
wanted.
are dead. Yeah,
they wanted the Air Jordans, or they wanted the Reebok pumps.
I remember when, back in the late 80s, early 90s, you'd hear about people getting their shoes stolen on the subways in New York.
Yeah.
Hey, what size are those?
But anyways,
about a size 11, right?
I remember what he said. I stepped on his shoes. He said, and I said, hey, I'm really sorry. Are you okay? And he was like, yeah, I'm okay. They're just shoes. And it was a totally different perspective.
Because they were Pro Wings.
Yeah, and it's and the thing is, he didn't differentiate. So wear what you can afford. It's, you know what, if you're gonna be so stressed about it getting damaged, then maybe you shouldn't be wearing it.
All right, let's go to the next one, number 8.
Do the work yourself. And this is basically, you have people who get someone else to cut their grass.
And you got robots for that now.
Yep, and they'll just
AI,
sit there.
guys, AI.
If you can do landscaping, just get a book, look up a DIY video on YouTube. You don't have to pay someone else if you have the time to do it. It's okay to pay someone to do something when it's gonna take away from your work.
Here's an idea for those, I like to solve problems. For a business idea, if you guys are interested in business, we've got a couple minutes left in our segment. Let's say you have a business where you buy a whole bunch of robotic lawnmowers, and now you set up your business and you put the robot to go cut while you're doing something else. You could be setting up another robot in another yard somewhere, and it's making you money, but you don't have to be on the actual robot or controlling it. It's doing all the work. So what it does is it cuts down on labor. You don't have to have as many people. So that's a little business idea for you guys. So do the work yourself. Number 9, do whatever it takes. Break that down. What do you mean by that?
Basically, you have to figure out how to solve the problems in your life. Your problems are different than mine. And ultimately, you are the person who is responsible with either talking to friends, coming up with the solution to your financial problems, until the government steps in and does it for you. But
until they come to help you, right?
Yeah. And what did Ronald Reagan say about that? He said, the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Terrifying.
Famous last words.
Yep. And finally, the last one is something that I've touched on in different ways. And that is learn to differentiate between needs and wants. As Americans, a lot of the things that we want, we don't actually need. We lie to ourselves and force ourselves to believe that we actually need them. I had a marketing professor who once said, basically, the people buy on emotion and justify with logic. So if you can differentiate between needs and wants, you will be able to reprogram your brain to work more like your grandparents' brain. Say, do we need this or do we want this?
Right.
And then you can buy on logic, not on emotion.
Right. And guys, that was our top 10. Thank you so much. We're going to move into our next segment, the Daily Stupid.
How dare you!
All right, guys, welcome back. This is our fun section. This is the Daily Stupid, where we bring you stupid stories. My Daily Stupid today is there's a guy, he'll remain unnamed, but you guys remember the Titan submersible that went down a couple weeks ago, about a month, maybe a month ago now? Mm-hmm. And it imploded and killed the occupants. So they have more of these submersibles. And this guy has a submersible and he actually went online. All right, first off, let me mention this. The company that was running the Titan, they shut down operations.
OceanGate.
OceanGate. They shut it down. They pulled their website, all their social media, it's all shut down. They're done. You don't come back from that sort of PR disaster, right? It's over. All because of the mentally ill captain, right? It's him. And it's his reluctance to, oh, who needs testing? Who needs safety? Who cares? Like, we'll just go down there and see what happens. That's our testing.
We did find out what happened.
We found out what happens. And it wasn't good. So the Daily Stupid goes to a guy who actually owned one of these submersibles. He went online and he was selling it for, get this guys, $950,000. Basically a $950,000 coffin.
Well, you know what's really interesting with that? So those rides down there were discounted to $250,000. So there was some good markup if you're paying,
excellent markup,
you know, like $900,000 for one of these, and then you have 4 passengers or something like that.
You're making all your money back.
You're making a lot of money.
That seems to be a great business.
I'm guessing this guy found out the market for Titan 2s and collapsed.
Go figure. Who tries to sell a death trap right after it kills a bunch of people?
Well, Ford tried with the Pinto.
That's my Daily Stupid. I think that was how does someone who even, but I think what he was hoping is there was someone even more stupid than him. I think he's a real capitalist. I think he's thinking there's going to be someone out there who's even more stupid who will buy this, maybe as a relic, put it in a museum. Didn't work out for him. Anyway, that's my Daily Stupid. What's yours?
So mine is dealing with AI. Hollywood studios proposed using AI to scan and own extras' likenesses forever. So basically, this is saying that these Hollywood companies are trying to scan people's faces, all of the extras, so they never have to get any extras again. They can just reuse your face and your image indefinitely and keep on putting them into different movies. So it says, during a press conference, the director and chief negotiator, Duncan Crabtree Ireland, said that the AMPTP made so-called groundbreaking AI proposals that would allow the likenesses of film and television background performers to be used in perpetuity. They proposed that our background performers should be able to be scanned and get paid for 1 day's pay.
Hey,
and
sounds like a good deal to me.
And their company should own that scan of their image, their likeness, and should be able to use it for the rest of eternity.
Wow, that sounds fair.
In any project they want.
You know what? That sounds great.
With no consent and no compensation, he said. So if you think that's a groundbreaking proposal, I suggest you think again. Because this is exactly, if you thought what Bard and I were saying was weird or crazy, outlandish a little while ago, well, this is what's going on now.
And that is incredibly stupid, because how do you come in a room with a straight face Hey guys, I got some great news. Got some great news for the actors. Technology once again has blessed us. We're gonna scan your likeness, pay you once, and never pay you again. Bye. Like,
I wonder.
how is that a deal?
Exactly. And you know what? Is it actually going to be highlighted in the terms and conditions? It probably won't. So,
It's on the last. It's in the middle of 1,000 pages.
They're going to say, hey, I'm going to pay you. We were going to pay you $150 for the 6 hours you're here today. But what we're going to do is we're going to give you an offer. $300, but you just sign this piece of paper right here.
An offer you can refuse.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, now we have a strike. And for very good reason. If you didn't think this strike was worthwhile, if you thought people were just greedy, they are literally fighting for their very existence. These people have mortgages, we just talked about.
Yep.
They have kids in school. This is their livelihoods. Think about your job right now. Whatever you do, think about your job and think about a company figuring out a way to take your job from you. Remember, you went to school. A lot of these people have degrees in English, degrees in writing, literature. Yep. They have student loans too, just like you, and their existence is being threatened right now with AI.
Joan is awful. Season 6 of Black Mirror.
Oh yeah.
Watch that.
Black Mirror season 6. Joan is awful. Watch that.
Yep.
Anyway, guys, this has been another episode of the Seiji Bar podcast. We thank you for subbing. We thank you for watching. Please definitely like, share, and continue to subscribe. Hit the notification bell. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.